Welcome to this very summary edition of the Backstage. Today, we are going to talk about one of the longest and most fruitful relationships that Alfa Romeo had with another uh, coach builder or body car maker. We are going to talk about Zagato today. We've seen many of these cars today, and I thank all the collectors who wanted to enrich our day with their cars. And let's start by saying that 1 hour something is for sure not sufficient to tell the story of Zagato and Alfa Romeo. We would need an entire backstage series and probably it would not even be enough. But it is anyway worth it to tell some details that can underline how this relationship that has been going on for so many years originated so many Alfa Romeo stories and continues to do so. So from the documentation center where we have papers dating back to the 20s which tell about cars, relationships and many other things, we decided just to extract a few details that we use to tell, especially in the post-war period, how this relationship was based, apart from the projects and the cars that saw the light. First of all, we saw that there was a very straightforward personal relationship with the managers of Alfa Romeo, Mr. Luraghi, and the ownership and management of Zagato. There were frequent meetings that often were not even put in the agendas, but then we can read of in the correspondence letters. So these letters talk about very bureaucratic reasons, but it was nice to see how there were meetings and then also a pencil note on paper by Luraghi saying, okay, so what happened during this meeting? And then there are hundreds and thousands of letters who tell about the origin of these cars or why these cars did not see the light. And then there are also other very interesting documents concerning the fact that in 1968, an idea from Alfa Romeo first, and in general from IRI, started to see the light of acquiring Zagato. And for 20 years, many brands tried to acquire or to control coach builders because they had, apart from an aesthetic role, also a productive role for the small series. But in this letter, this is one of the letters that Luraghi wrote, well, Luraghi was convinced that a coach builder should be independent, and for such an entity to be independent meant to be free from the relationship with other builders, but also free from Alfa Romeo to bring about ideas, small productions, and to have someone that, not far from the plant, could raise the bar and see in the future, also in a provocative way. But as always, in our backstages, the focus of our storytelling are our guests. So I would like to call on stage Andrea Zagato, who needs no introduction. And I would like to ask also Paolo di Taranto, and Armando Keller, who is the president of the Italian Registry of Alfa Romeo, who brought us today also a beautiful 1900. Well, the first speech it goes to the owner of the topic, so I leave you the floor for your presentation. Thank you. Well, we cannot show all the Zagato models for Alfa Romeo because they are 150, but we can focus on a few elements that are characteristics of the DNA of our company, which also influenced and partly influenced Alfa Romeo. First of all, the origins. In Milan, at the beginning of the 1900s, there were 70 coach builders which had their experience from the coach itself, because the coach was invented in Piacenza, Ferrara, and in Milan we had centers to build coaches in 1400. So much so that the Sun King, apparently from Paris, commissioned coaches to Milanese coach builders, which were then sent to Paris. So there were cabinet makers and other artists who did all the internal parts of the coaches. The main characteristics of Zagato is that the company didn't come from that environment. So my grandfather didn't come from the coaches, but from the aeronautics world. He worked with Ansaldo Pomiglio. So he was a manager of Ansaldo during the war. This is very famous. Maybe some of you recognize it. It was the D'Annunzio plane that D'Annunzio used on Vienna to stop the war. So there was a pilot and D'Annunzio. The pilot had to be super light. So my grandfather used a very light fuselages to have it fly longer. So that's the origin of our brand, which then influenced our entire story, the aeronautics world. 3 models, one for Alfa Romeo, one for Lancia, and one for Ferrari, and all have a language that dates back to the plane world. So you see the shape of the fuselage and the tail. In the second one, you see almost an overturned wing that for a Lancia in 1936 was very innovative. This is a Ferrari from 1949, and it has the canopy, the cockpit, which reminds of the cockpit of an airplane. So our company had in its DNA the effect of designing very light bodies of cars, like fuselages, that had to be light and aerodynamic. So this is the main characteristic. So how Alfa Romeo and Zagato met? Well, not with Ferrari, but way before, with Jano. When Jano discovered these bodyworks, he gave the commission to my grandfather for Alfa Romeo competition cars, and so they started to win all races. Ferrari started afterwards because in 1929 the Scuderia Ferrari was born. The horse was not here yet because the father of Baracca in 32 granted them the possibility to use the horse. And you see 2 Alfa Romeo Zagato, and you see an exclusive collaboration because Enzo Ferrari wanted cars that were 150 to 200 kilos less heavy because they were more drivable and fast. So apart from few exceptions, I mean the private clients, all the cars from the Scuderia Ferrari were done by my grandfather. In 1932, and so I can introduce the first car that is exhibited here because it's from 1932, or 32 or 33, I guess. It was the year when Alfa Romeo was acquired by Liri, and so it became a state company. Becoming a state company, the language of Alfa Romeo changes, and maybe visiting the museum you realize it. The period from 32 to 45 is different because the company, becoming a state-owned company, was a national communication asset towards the outer world. So the regime, so it's something that could promote the Italian state abroad, just like the Germans were promoted by Mercedes. So the language of Alfa Romeo changed, which for a limited period of time, the period of the regime, was no longer the beauty of the first years, the needed beauty of the first years and in the post-war period, but became more sort of a promotional language. So cars become bigger, heavier. They were not looking after the lightness, which is exemplified at the most beautiful model, which is the 8C Monza. And this is probably one of the last ones of the pre-regime period. And then we get to this one. In the after war, the collaboration between Zagato and Alfa Romeo starts again because it was interrupted in the years of regime because my father was not belonging to any political party, so he was not longer with Scuderia Ferrari, the Ram. So it was more working with private car makers like Scuderia Ferrari, the Ram, etc., more than Alfa Romeo. So then the war ended and Alfa Romeo goes back to the origin, which was the idea of the needed beauty, the idea that accompanied this company during its entire life. This is the Gran Turismo Monza starting phase. This new category was invented in Milan. It was called GT Gran Turismo, and which was intermediate between the Turismo, where Vignale, Pininfarina, Touring, all the coach makers were doing cars, and the sports, which were like driving cars, race cars, almost impossible to drive. Gran Turismo was a car that could go on the racetrack on a Sunday, but also go to a concours d'élégance. Those that you can see here are almost all Zagato. So you could also win a concours d'élégance. So in the post-war period, we started working a lot in the Gran Turismo, and so we started working again back with Alfa Romeo with the 3000 cm, and then with the car that Hermano will talk about, which translates the concept of needed beauty in the post-war period. I tried to go fast. One of the characteristics of our company is having only produced coupe, 2 doors, 2+2. We never ventured into creating 4-door cars or SUVs, etc. So we remain very consistent in our history, and the other characteristic is that there is an uninterrupted story of 103 years. So we managed to represent history with a change of languages, but always being consistent and continuous. So this company was there in all the stages of development of the history of the car in the last 100 years. And here we talk about Alfa. I took 6 models, I chose and selected 6 models to have you imagine those meetings with Luraghi. So what they were talking about? They were talking about building an exceptional car, not a series car, but starting from a series car. We wanted to do the Gran Turismo, the 2 doors coupe in aluminum, very light. So the point is, can we do a very sports 2 doors coupe on your 1900 sedan? And the answer was yes, and we see it in the next image. So this was the base, and we used what today is the spine of the car and the mechanics to create the enlightened version that was then prepared by Conrero and the different preparators of the time, and we had it race in the Gran Turismo races. So Alfa Romeo gained popularity because by winning competitions, if you had a 1900, you thought you had the same engine and mechanics, and on the other side, we were competitive on the racetracks. So this was our joint collaboration. Next car is the SZ that you all know. That was also born to race. It was born as SWZ, that Marx brought, evolved in SZ, which won in all the races in France, England, Germany. Same mechanics, same engine, but a more aerodynamic and lighter shape that was winning. This is the TZ, which inspires the idea of the truncated back, so very aerodynamic, of the Giulia. The base is the same of the Giulia, but the Giulia translates part of the tests that were done on the track that we have in front of us with the Alfa's engineer to find a perfect aerodynamic shape, which reminds a little bit a bullet. And then the front on the 2006, you can see a new design in the front, which innovates, because the other function of the coach builder was to be provocative. So to provoke doing something new that potentially could be followed by a series car. That car never raced, but it was very innovative from the point of view of design language. Always talking about innovation in the design language, we get to the first wedge shape of Alfa Romeo. And I confirm what I just said. Alfa Romeo then translated the Sprint and the GTV, which are very similar to the Junior Z, but are of a later period. GTV is a Junior Z pantographed. So, but the wedge language starts from these cars. So they started with a small series, and then the brand develops this language internally, and this is one of those cases. And then we have the SZ, which is the most critical moment of the history of Alfa Romeo, when Alfa Romeo was hesitant between becoming from a branch of the Ford or the Fiat group. It was the period of Ghidella, the early 90s. The SZ is a car that Ghidella wanted. He didn't hide he wanted to go with Ford, but then you all know what happened. That was a car that was sort of a show car, which came from the aeronautics, because for the first time the CAD-CAM Kai from the Dassault systems, which were in the aeronautics field, was applied. So the first car created with the CAD in the history of automobile, the first car made with plastic materials, low pressure injection plastics applied on a steel body. It was very innovative, and it was also a way to present to the possible shareholders the company as an innovative company. Let's get to today. First of all, the presentation that I showed you is the same that I did 2 years ago to Imparatu, to convince him to have me create the green car. So in this car, he's sitting next to me. So after 2 years, we are at Le Mans, and we celebrated the return of Alfa Romeo at Le Mans with the Italian flag created by the TZ Corsa, TZ Stradale, and the short wheelbase presented in January. So I presented with Imparato, just like my father did with Loraghi, the possibility of doing a coupe with a shortened wheelbase of the Giulia, and then we presented all over the world and in Le Mans as well. And you see the SZ at the back. So this is a car. We adopted the lamps of Tonale for a family feeling hint, but we were quite innovative on the tail, on the back. Once again, as we did at the time, I worked with Egge, Walter Silva, and today with Mesonero. We created co-design. So we work together at the design center of Alfa Romeo. We don't work as an alternative to the design center as we could do for other designers, but we always blend experiences. We mix the DNAs, we bring ours, we take theirs, and in the end, the car is the result of the melting of this DNA. This is the Arese racetrack that we have in front of us with the SWB, and for this occasion we also brought the SZ of a friend of ours, which is here just outside. This is the back, the tail that we wanted to make so innovative, and Mesonero suggested us and also brought as an innovative element the treatment of the lamp that he sees as the language for the future of Alfa Romeo. So the function of the coach builder was to provoke, but also to offer new things that potentially could be reproduced in high numbers in series. The press coverage was exceptional, with just a presentation of a prototype. This was the other function of the coach builders, to provoke and have the press coverage and get the consensus that helped the automobile makers like Alfa Romeo to decide what to do in the future and how to proceed. And with this, I leave the floor to you. Well, to us, today it is very important to have this backstage on the Alfa Romeo Zagato. So it was important to have the voice of Zagato through a person who also bears the name. We also have the possibility of having the representation of the Italian registry of Alfa Romeo, which is also the custodian of many things, among which the work done by the coach builders. Just a couple of things. I'm the president of the Italian registry of Alfa Romeo. I have the honor of representing the registry, and for this day dedicated to Alfa Romeo and Zagato, I had the opportunity to bring my 1900 Super Spring Zagato, which I believe is one of the icons that I've represented before, showing that it's probably the first post-war car that brings back the joint venture between Alfa Romeo and Zagato. Just a few were made, only 38. Mine was one of the three that Joachim Bonnier, which I later discovered, apart from being a great Swedish pilot, was also an importer of Alfa Romeo for Sweden in the 50s, bought three. So out of 38, almost 10% went to Sweden. He used one to race, the one which is outside in the same color, so black with the red interiors. Because I have pictures of the time in colors, the car arrived in August 55 for the Swedish Grand Prix, again with the plates of the customs. It participated to the competition, ranking third, and the car remained in Sweden for almost 40 years. I had the chance to buy it from a person who was trying to renovate it but could never decide to do that. The car was complete. Now I think it's one of the examples of a car that, even though it raced, even though it lived in a very difficult country in terms of weather like Sweden's, is today as it was when it went out of the Zagato workshop with the original interior. So this is the spirit of our registry, to maintain the cars as they were when they were created. Thank you. Thank you, Armando. And Paolo? So you offered me a very nice analysis of this, of all that Zagato did and how it did it from the origins till today, side by side, Alfa Romeo. I tried to do that. First of all, if you allow me, I wanted to thank everyone who made this event possible. You, first of all, and then this teamwork to have here a 9000 SSZ in these conditions, and SVZ or TZ, apart from the junior Z, till the SZ and RZ, because it's not as easy as saying it. Today these cars are investments but also works of art and are managed like this. So to put them to risk for them, well, it's not easy, and we really appreciate it. I don't know when a parade like this one with these original cars could be made once again. So I lost already some minutes, and I want to go back to this profile. To me, it is impressive. So I'm talking as a fan and a small collector. To see such an overview from 1921 to 2022 uninterrupted. The Zagato history, Ugo, Elio, Gianni, Andrea, Marella, 3 generations, and also uninterrupted the relationship with Alfa Romeo. So 160 different models. It's incredible, and it also triggered in us the willingness to analyze which were the ingredients, because it is easy to think that yes, we were neighbors, or that an evolution of the design could bring to all this. But of course, there was something at the base that we tried to sum up in these days. Let's start from the beginning. As you can see, the first car is from 1921, G1 Lusso Zagato, which at first sight doesn't have a lot to do with the concept of competition and race of Zagato. So this is the provocation. So Ugo Zagato's background is not only races and aeronautics, but also a technical uh, training. So at 15 years of age, he went to Cologne in Germany from a very poor Pulesine to learn metalworking. After 5 years of German rigor and apprenticeship, he goes back to Italy to the Carrozzeria Varosina of Cesare Belli, founded in 1845. And there he learns the technical construction of a coach builder. That's why we see cars that are like a limousines or torpedo, because he also deepened this part. And then there's the more brave side of cars having a fuselage typical of the DNA acquired at the Pomiglio Ansaldo workshops. From 1915 to 1919, it will bring about this with pride. So there's the union of these three pillars: German training, the technique of the body work, and the technique of aeronautics learned from Pomiglio, leading Zagato to develop these models, initially very different among them. That's why you will see here limousines, balloons as they call it, torpedo, till the very fast racetracks that Dr. Zagato defines planes without wings, where, for example, a very young Enzo Ferrari started racing, that from 23 collaborated with Zagato and before Alfa Romeo, and then winning in 27 the first car with the SS. So the fourth pillar, according to us, is the relationship with Alfa Romeo. Because geographically, they were, yes, very close. So from Sempione, Viale Brianza, Portello of Alfa Romeo, there was this friendship which was personal but also professional. In 1925, Zagato moves to Viale Fulvio Traiano, which was near Portello, and the friendship with Vittorio Iano started, leading the 1500 in the Zagato version to see the light, and from the Mille Miglia onwards, it would do wonders. But even before this RM, RLSS that you see here, and the 1756C and 8C afterwards, would be the fruit of this cocktail, which would never stop. So, what a Corsa Z3 Stradale and Z3 starts from these very solid grounds. You see here the Mille Miglia cars, the evolution of the 6C and then 6C models, also with very different types of bodyworks. From Zagato, we expect the Spider 6C GS, but going in our archive, we found experimental concepts like this one and like aerodynamic coupe that really anticipated by 20 years what would have been the first coupes of the 40s and Gran Turismo of the 50s. So Alfa Romeo started friendships with Vittorio Iano and Enzo Ferrari, the pilots of the time, and it was this Milanese Dolce Vita which to us stimulated a lot Zagato and Alfa Romeo. So Ugo had the trust and the commitment of Alfa Romeo to generate all this. And then for the racetracks, we get to the 2003, short and long for Mille Miglia and Le Mans, that touched the apex of the automobile world of the times. Imagine what could do someone like Vittorio Iano with Zagato. They were crazy about researching mechanics and performances and for Alfa Romeo, and aerodynamics and lightness for Zagato. So this needed beauty, necessary beauty, which is a slogan by Alfa Romeo and also ours, comes from the beauty that you see, from the beauty that is given by the designer and the coach builder of the time. And you see this. It's not a chance if these cars today have the top ranking values of the world collectors because they did something exceptional both in the design and in the performance and in races as well as concours d'élégance. Up to the Second World War, so the sketches and the profiles that we are seeing tell us that in reality Ugo Zagato almost had a second life professionally. Look at this. One exclusively dedicated to races, as Mr. Zagato said, and one linked to industrial but also private clients who, during the fascist regime, was abandoned in favor of the races. So Ugo would not lend itself to the opulence of the moment because Italy had to appear in a richer way that to us was also heavier in terms of kilos of weight of the body of the car. But he started to do these very fast barchetta type of cars. You see the fenders are hybrid, bicycle style. So there's so many different types. In our rich archives, we found any possible combination of research in terms of shape and materials. And it's not by chance if the Alfa Romeo of Enzo Ferrari from 29 to 36 would be, most of the time, created by Ugo. That's why in the Bologna Salon of 32 there was Carrozzeria Zagato in red next to the Alfa Romeo brand. So then in the 30s, some elements, like the elements around the tires, were abandoned, and we started to see more aerodynamics for a decade. So research of performance, of speed, is brought to the extremes and would bring to a sort of a 40s single volume car of the panoramic cars. These 8C aerodynamics represented a quantic leap compared to the concept of 8C developed in the past. There's so many. Yeah, I apologize to let you speak so fast and so long, but it's what you asked. I know, but there are so many things in the archives, technical drawings, maquettes. So we extended the philosophy of Zagato not vertically but horizontally, because in this case you really see the same body, the same engine developed with different classes of bodyworks. And then there was the Brianza Carrozzeria, which was very close to the Zagato because the ownership was the same, Viale Brianza 10, but not identical in terms of finishings of those cars. So there, again, they tried to develop some goals, and the Brianza, which are more similar to the Zagato, were called the Tipo Zagato. It's very interesting. We also talked about this with Axel in our long and passionate Mille Miglia more than once. And the panoramic cars anticipate the concept of coupe from the 50s and also of the Gran Turismo that Andrea Zagato hinted at. So, being a sort of connection between the previous years and the post-war period. In the post-war period, this dichotomy between luxury and race is lost because Ugo Zagato would be definitely interested and dedicated to races. Also because when Elio, his first son, was born, well, he could count on a very passionate man who, starting from the late 40s, started to race with the small Zagatos, and then he developed this great passion. And here we are in the post-war period from the Alfetta 159 from Fangio that would lead to the Apex in 51, 63 3000 Zagato by Bonnier, which has the Swedish colors. Well, these experiments, and in reality here, there was already a tubular chassis, correct me if I'm wrong, but this makes us understand how the research was anticipated. The research bring it to the SZ with the truncated back to the TZ and all the others in the subsequent decades. So from this niche but influential sports area, synthesized in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and also being a link to what would come afterwards. And here is the beautiful 1100 SSZ, so I leave you the floor again. Yes, I interrupt you now because this is the question that I wanted to ask Hermano. But before I heard you talking among you and speaking about this concept of necessary beauty, which for Alfa Romeo is a very strong concept. Alfa Romeo uses it always, not only in terms of communication, but also to define a part of its image. And I heard you discussing about how some details of this car could represent the emblem of this concept. So if you want to restart from the conversation you left outside, that would be great. I think that Andrea could explain better than me the strange nose that this car has. Because it's very nice if you look at it like this. I think it is emblematic for the model, but it was born from a technical need. The concept could be derived from an idea of Enzo Ferrari, which said, the winning car is the most beautiful car. So if you rank second, but your car is less beautiful than mine, this was the concept of Enzo Ferrari. But in reality, if the function, the purpose for which you design the car is winning the car, well, if you win the car, you have the best drawing. So the best drawing is the one of the winning car. That was the fundamental of the concept. And then, as I said before, to me, the most sublime car ever produced by Alfa Romeo is the 8C Monza. The 8C Monza is extremely simple, extremely beautiful, and it won practically all the races it took part to. So the concept of Enzo Ferrari, which had the 8C Monza in his garage, well, the car was beautiful because it was a winning car, and the car was functional because it reached the goal, and the goal was always the same, winning the Mille Miglia in the Gran Turismo, and the car won the Mille Miglia and the Gran Turismo. And in order to do that, the function was overpassed. If you see the hood, we can see they created a hood that would have been very high, but it was made very aerodynamics here by going above the engine. So you see, the engine is inserted in the front of the car, and the bodywork is designed around the function. That's the way to read it. So it's the need to overcome function that brings you to this result. The car is more aerodynamics and is innovative because all the contestants had flatter hoods in order for the lamps to be more in line with a central radiator. So this forced element makes it peculiar and winning on the race. So for Enzo Ferrari, more beautiful, but also very modern as concept. It is a car that is still modern as of today. Today, coming here, I could drive it on the highway as with a modern car. Well, it was a little bit warm, even if it's mid-October, but it's a car which I took part to some concours d'élégance, and I won some of them because the car won the concours because it's beautiful, but I raced the Mille Miglia, the Gran Premio Nuvolari. So it's the dichotomy that Andrea talked about, a car that you can race with, which was born to race, but which is so beautiful that it can also win concours. And Paolo, in this period, another life for Alfa Romeo was beginning, because Alfa Romeo has to find its dimension in a production which is no longer the 220 cars per year. It's an average number of the pre-war period, but overpasses 500 units per day in the post-war period. So there will always be some room for more extreme cars, but there was also the role of the coach makers that had to change and adapt. Yes, it is true, and it is interesting also how this evolution, so part of the socio-economical, industrial, technological Italian picture, was progressively managed by restarting always from the roots. This, the Giulietta SW Zagato, from 57, in fact, was born, as many of us know, from a car accident. So a customer, the Fratelli del Priolo, that after having a crash went to Zagato. So these provocations often were born with the concept of atelier of couture, but in that industrial moment, Zagato tried, together with Alfa Romeo, to bring them to a limited number series before Gran Turismo, then semi-industrialized like the Junior Z, almost to the wider public or to the wider public. It was not easy because starting from this, the gap was wide. We see here the 1900 Zagato, in this case in a double hunch version, last cars of 57, one of the cars that were united to 38. That's why I wanted to tell you that there was 40 with an asterisk in the slide, because the research around these chassis and versions are very, very specific, and there are fans, there are registries that keep track of this. This was a design and commercial evolution. It is very interesting because it was like an exchange between the fan, client, the Zagato brothers, and an industrial company like Alfa Romeo, which was very sensitive to this. The SZ history tells that from the SVZ, then the path led very far. And this is another provocation of what I said before in my previous speech. This is the Alfa Abarth 1000. We have a technical drawing from 58. So once again, I want to talk about the tubular chassis, because the tubular chassis would have become the TZ chassis just a few years later. But in reality, this Alfa Abarth 1000 was produced in a single edition by Bertone. Ours remained a drawing, but also a technical model, a maquette, but it anticipated a lot of themes, and we were back in 58. So in parallel, the tubular chassis was developed for sports cars, and customers and company developed limited and number series. So the legendary SZ with a round back, which, coming from the Giulietta, which was produced in series, allowed Zagato to give an important added value to Alfa Romeo, because these were the sports cars which were, well, in the Giulietta range, and there was nothing more than this. So the legendary SZ with a truncated back was quicker than the round back by 20 kilometers per hour, thanks to the bodywork from the shapes that came from the theories of Professor Kamm. So this Kamm tail, as we all know, would influence the future really up to present days. Here there is a series of competitions, victories, and the TZ also was born in the Spider version. We both know that we have the pictures, the projects, and the development of this research, which is a steady, constant. Here again, they talked about Giulietta TZ, because at the time there was still the 1,300 audience linked to the Giulietta Berlina, so they had to impress this public with these products. And I think that Zagato was also a marketing tool at the moment for Alfa Romeo, as in some leaflets from Giulia Berlina, for example, that start from the cam tail of, and the truncated back. Here we have a hard top, and then we see that the origin of the final TZ from 63 was very diversified because there were different products for Alfa Romeo and for Zagato private customers. And here we turn the page with 1600. As Andrea Zagato hinted before, we always try to dress every model of the range. So when we talk about 2600, we talk with the presidential sedan, there's a Bertone Coupe, the Spider Touring with the short wheelbase, and on this Zagato invented something very strong. This one was also developed for an economy run because the topics of consumption and energy efficiency were very, very current at the time. It was an internal obsession of Zagato's brothers. So from the economy run, which was this competition where if you use less fuel, you won, not if you were faster. This technical and fascinating model would be developed, and then it would take the form of these 105 cars that would be faster than 200 kilometers per hour, thanks to this bodywork designed by Ercole Spada, who designed it as having two volumes, one softer, the front one, and very aerodynamic, and the back one deriving from CAM's theories developed by Zagato on the Milano Bergamo on the SZ with the truncated bed. You talked about the economy run before, and I found this document, one of the letters of Zagato towards Alfa Romeo's management, one of the many where they summed up the situation of the time. So the moment when Zagato asked for a meeting to Mr. Zagati to update him. So I found this for the last point, where they talk about the Grand Sport quattro ruote, but in the previous paragraph they also talk about the result and the idea of the economy run that would originate to the 2600 SZ. As I was telling you, I chose this to talk about the quattro ruote because from many sides it is a car which is out of the box, also for a car, a coach builder which at the time focused on extreme cars also to get incredible performances, and that and which recalls one of the pillars of the history of Alfa Romeo and Zagato from the 30s. It was something that today is coming back. We hear about this, many car producers are starting to think about it, but at the time it was very original. There were small coach builders dealing with this kind of projects, but the idea that there was a project uniting a big builder like Alfa Romeo and a historical coach builder which had a strong relationship with Alfa Romeo and the magazine, well, originated something unique. So unique that I asked you whether we could talk about this in this case, or if we could have made a gaffe. No, we talk about this because you asked this. But this was the car that was used when I went to university, and was also owned by Celentano, and Celentano put it on the cover of Azzurro. If you have the old vinyl of Celentano Azzurro, he had this car, Caterina Caselli, and this car, maybe you don't know these names, and Antoine, the singer. It was very popular. And on this I would add just a few details. Well, not details maybe. The first one is the technical and technological development of this car. It was because it was in the Alfa Romeo production list. So if Alfa Romeo produced something, well, they produced it in the best possible way. So this car was developed restarting from the plane, the base, which was elongated, the car was narrowed, and then it was changed in terms of handling, driving box to put it on the market in the utmost safety. Personal note, I thank my friend Axel Marx for suggesting me to take my quattro ruote Grand Sport because on the occasion of another Mille Miglia that we did together on the beautiful 1900 SSZ, we're talking about this, but also about those copies of Leontine and Petronella, which are playful, fascinating, and Axel invited me to think about the fact that this was an entirely new product, entirely developed starting from the 1600 Spider Giulia to as a tribute to the 30s. And I participated to a concours d'elegance with the Grand Sport, and Giorgetto Giugiaro was there, and he stopped in front of the Grand Sport commenting the same thing exactly. I heard he said it is really well made because it is well proportioned. So it's not an imitation, but the proportions are great and based on the Giulia 1600 at the time. Let's get to more serious business. This is a quantum leap on the Giulia TZ2, so there's almost not much to say compared to the grandeur of the project. There's a constant evolution with TZ2, which finds its apex in the development of the vitro resin bodywork. So even though it was only realized in 9 exemplaries, they are still a milestone today as in terms of historical pedigree and for collectors. Probably if someone would like to buy a TZ2 original and recognized, would hardly find the right one. As I was saying before, and this was the reason why the builders were thinking about buying the coach builders, was that the coach builders had a creative role in terms of design, engineering, but they also had a productive aspect. And in a period when internal assembly lines were not flexible as today, and creating limited series was impossible because we had to use small external lines, the project of the Juno Zagato starts to be more concrete because they wanted to do some more, not only a small project. So we don't know whether this letter refers to the Junior Zagato, but there was this request from Zagato to have the technical drawings of the Giulia Spring GT, and we're talking about a date which is way before when they started to talk seriously about the Junior Zagato, because there were agreements that here are not written because they probably were oral agreements because Zagato and Luraghi who probably talked about the project. So at that point, the two companies had to meet to have the elements to develop the project. So this was the starting point. We like to think of the Junior Zagato. So when you start to go from a dinner conversation, probably, I like to think, to a real project that will see the light through sketches, maquettes, and so on. I don't know whether Andrea wants to add something. I didn't remember this one. I see this today and it is very fascinating. Well, the Junior is the first car with the wedge concept, which then became a leitmotif for Alfa Romeo for 15 years almost. So it is the first car where the wedge is developed without compromises. It is important because, as in every collector's car, if there's an important history, the value goes up. The cars that have no important histories don't increase their value. So in the collector's environment, the meaningful models constantly increase their value. So if you have that car, you can rest assured that the value will increase. It is the first block of the wedge concept of Alfa Romeo. I had very nice memories because my father drove it And he didn't forget how to drive the sports cars because he was a great pilot. So when I was young, I had so much fun with that car and my father. Both the 1300 and the next one, which is called 1600 Z or GTZ, which has a slightly longer back. And then there are many other talks for a 2 liters version, but it would remain a project worked with Alfa Romeo, but with no production future. Yes, it's a very long history. So if we show some more models, I would like to show how the Junior Z that we all love here have influenced and changed radically the design of the models of the future. And also in this case, being in the Alfa Romeo range and developed by Alfa and then marketed and sold by Alfa Romeo, the Junior Z is a car which is really unique for those who have the pleasure of driving it and owning it. It has a concepts of ergonomics and manageability which are unique. It is very, very slow, but you can drive it for thousands of kilometers. As our friends from Rome who drove it yesterday well know. It started from the base of the Spider, who had a stiff geometry, but if you put a truncated tail 1.20 meters tall, something exceptional comes out. 1300 short, very manageable, 1600 faster, that little bit that was not enough when we make comparisons in the club, that with the cams back exceeds 200 kilometers per hour. So some wrote that the Junior Z is one of the most manageable cars of all the Alfa Romeo cars, and I invite everyone to test it because it was an incredible project which inspired the Alfa Sud Sprint, the GTV, the GTV6, some further tests up to the one that we see here, the S30 SZ that Andrea Zagato talked about before, which was also the first project that I saw Dr. Zagato working on when he started the third generation. So with this CAD process, which skips so many intermediate steps of clay models to get to a car which was developed in a very competitive way to go on the market in a very fast and dynamic way. Today, the Atelier Zagato has a virtual room, a virtual reality room, which dates back to almost 30 years ago, thanks to the development of SZ and RZ. And then here are the 90s with experimentation, always to continue working on all the models of the Alfa Romeo brand. We have the 155, TZ and GT, GT-AZ, with different aerodynamics elements for the Japanese market. This is my period when Walter de Silva creates the nicest, the most beautiful design center for cars in Europe here in Varese. And we decide to become complementaries to the Alfa Romeo Design Center, bringing to us everything that that was not present at the design center. So he had dictates from the company. So what he could not have here, well, we realized it 1 kilometer far from here. So we had a model department which was incredible, with 3 drilling machines that could not be put here in the design center of Alfa Romeo because there was not enough space. So we worked for 10 years for the design center of Alfa Romeo, and all the cars of Walter de Silva and Wolfgang Enger went out together. So we did the mathematics in the room that Paolo talked about, the models also, and were present here. So we see the 156, 147, all the cars of the famous Alfa Romeo Design Center passed through us, including the 8C, which was completely modeled by us. The prototypes were made by us, and the 8C Spider. Until when, in 2005, the Alfa Romeo Design Center in Arese was closed and everything would be brought to Via Plava in Turin. This is the famous Alfa Romeo TZ3 Corsa. We added this 8C in the name for this occasion to remind that it had the 8-cylinder engine, always to confirm this declination. It was a very lucky project, jointly born. It was developed a little bit here, a little bit at Zagato, until when a German collectionist made it a reality. So in this case, we went back to the atelier of the 30s with the technologies of 2010. We had to celebrate 100 years of Alfa Romeo. It was 2010. The Alfa Anonima Fabbrica Automobili was born in 1910, and we went to Villa d'Este. We won the Villa d'Este concours with this car in the centennial year. But we wanted to do a road version because the car that we presented at Villa d'Este was a race car with 8C engine. So on one side we thought of working on a more aerodynamic 8C that could be an evolution of the 8C limited series, but and on the other side something happened that had us opt for this white car that you see. In that moment, the entire world of the press wrote that Alfa Romeo basically was going to become an Audi Volkswagen company. Walter de Silva became the head of all the design centers, and there was on the table an important offer for Alfa Volkswagen to acquire Alfa Romeo. So Marchionne, by surprise for everyone, declared that not only Fiat did not fail, but that it bought Chrysler and the American Jeep. A new group called Fiat Chrysler Automobile was created. It was the occasion for us to see what happened in the automobile Jeep and Chrysler heritage, and we found an iconic model for Americans. It was called Viper, probably the most iconic car of Chrysler. Everyone talked about this. It was like a myth because they could had it on the Nürburgring. So the proportions of the Viper perfectly merged with the proportions of our TZ. They even had the exhaust on the side next to the wheel, like the TZ, and the front was very long, and the seat way in the back. So we decided to do a provocation by drawing Alfa Romeo TZ on a mechanized chassis of the Viper. So we realized 10, this is the prototype 00, and then we created 9 art multiples that we sold to American collectors. And this is considered probably in the history the first American Alfa, the car that identified the shift from Fiat to FCA. This is a very interesting point of view, because how could we imagine, when we published the photo that we published last week of these two cars outside of the museum, well, the fact that so many questions arrived, also critiques, understandable positions, asking for explanations why the two cars were shown together. And this is kind of what Luraghi said in his letter. So the freedom, independence that the coach builders should have in innovating and proposing. So thank you for this explanation. Maybe this describes the passage from Alfa Romeo Alfa to Iri. Like he said, this is the shift from Alfa to FCA. So, well, they both had something in common. And then we can get to today. Yes, to today, the presentation which I did in the beginning was used to convince Imparato to allow us to create a provocation based on the Giulia. So Giulia, which arrived after this car, this is from 2011, and Giulia arrived afterwards. So Giulia and Stelvio arrived afterwards. Is the return to Alfa Romeo, to the back wheel drive. So we wanted to bring this concept to the limits. And as the concept of the Giulia base and of the Stelvio is a modular, it could be also declined in other forms of chassis like Spider, station wagon. Well, we tried to shorten the wheelbase, making the short wheelbase, the passo corto, and see how a Giulia with a short wheelbase could have been at the times of Luraghi. Unfortunately, we are not living in the times of Luraghi where everything was easier. Today it is way more complicated, but the result had an incredible return on the press, and it was also christened a miracle in Milan because it was probably a provocation that everybody was waiting for. Our conversation, if you want, will continue inside the museum, but in telling this place that talks about automobiles and passion of fans, I'd like to talk about the third aspect of Backstage, which is not only the research that we do, not only the guests that come here, but also the relationships with the clubs. And the idea of a Backstage dedicated to Zagato was not born by us, which are 1 kilometer away, but from the Club Alfisti Romani, which proposed this to the meeting of last year, and we gladly accepted it. So I would like Angelo Cavalli to come here to express his greetings and also to talk about the third car we have here, his car. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm here to tell my experience of happy owner of that 1600Z. I want to say something immediately. It was the car which chose me. I was not the one who chose her. We were in May 1973. I was 25. And I went to the historical Raganelli dealership in Rome to buy a Duetto truncated back 1600 because I wanted to buy it. And in the window, she was there. I was struck. But I went inside to Raganelli, I signed a contract for the Duetto. The Duetto would arrive after a few months. I chose the accessories, the options, etc. I go back home, and when I go out again, I see that beautiful car, which I already knew. But it was the first car that I was seeing it in real life, so I didn't sleep that night thinking about it. The next day I said, no, it's not possible. I go back to Raganelli, say, may I change instead of the Duetto? I'd like to buy this one. And they said, yes, why not? In 2 days, I had it in my garage. So this is the business car of that car. So it's celebrated 50 years, May the 30th of this year. It has always stayed with me. I drove it 150,000 kilometers for 12 years. I use it every day. It was the last year of university. I had to graduate in medicine at the Sapienza University in Rome, back and forth, back and forth. So the car was driven in the city traffic. It also accompanied me during the service, the military service at the Civitavecchia army station. So, and then when I started to work for 8 more years, she was with me. And then when I bought that car, I was conscious of what I was buying. I was conscious and I knew that that car would have never been sold. So after 12 years, I said, okay, you served well, and now I fix all the little problems of the city car, the scratches, etc. So I fix it, after which I use it randomly in the summer. I went to holiday with this one. So around Europe, I drove it for many kilometers. Just one summer, in summer 1973, I did a tour in 1 month of 8,000 kilometers in Eastern Europe. It was a feat in those years. It was also restful. Reaching the border with the Soviet Union, Romania, Soviet Union, and then back. The car performed extremely well. And then I was not, and I'm not one who drives slowly. And we say in Rome, I have a heavy foot. And then on roads which were not perfect, I still remember how I crossed Bulgaria, holes after holes. So the only problem is that I had a punctured tire, and there were no tire workshops. I had to have my car repaired at the branch of the Moskvich. So you can imagine. And third phase of her life, I neglected it a little bit, always in my garage, because then I had other experiences also important, the different universes. But I met Alfa Romeo, so I don't mention the other brands. So after having these other experiences, well, getting old, you go back to your first love. So now I've been part of the Alfisti Romani club for many years, and with them I started using it again. So it's not Junior Z 1600, but 1600 Z, and here we are. So I don't want to spend more time, but Lorenzo knows us very well, because even if we are not close, we are always here. If we lived very close, we would be here every week. So that's the story till today. We got to the final part, and I also conclude, otherwise I'm too long, and I would like to thank, first of all, Lorenzo, who welcomed our invitation, of course Andrea Zagato, and the other important representatives we have here today. And last but not least, allow me to thank myself. So to thank my club, Club Alfisti Romani, specifically the president, who we see here shooting videos, Marco Vita. Well, thank you. Also because we have the history of the company. We have the company, those who deal with the conservation, Alfa Romeo, and passion is fundamental. And then in different ways, this animates our backstages, the museum, and Alfa Romeo. I thank you once again. I thank Andrea Zagato, Hermano Keller, and Paolo Di Taranto, who I would have liked to speak for more time today, and I thank you, the collectors who brought us their beautiful Zagato, and those who brought other Alfa Romeo, and also those who didn't bring Alfa Romeos that maybe, seeing so much beauty, could be convinced to buy one. See you next time.